Conversation around the globe. This is Relax Radio.
It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. So listen to us, 24 hours, and let the happiness come to you on Relax Radio. Tune in to Relax Radio.
Relax Radio.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Wednesday Whitterer with George Shaft. My name is George Shaft and you are joined today in the studio by some new music for the little button that I've just pressed, which is very, very interesting. Also joining me in the studio today is, of course, actually a bit of news. This is going to be a bit different from the normal Wednesday Whitterer, but there's been a story that has come in and really taken my attention like nothing else, and I felt like I had to talk about it. Don't worry though, the little thing I've teased you with earlier, which is an in-depth hour-long discussion on herbs, is going to be incoming, but first, we have the Guardian newspaper here with its article titled Sleeping Giant. Arctic methane deposits starting to release, scientists find. Okay, oh dear. This is the sort of story which you will see kind of in the background rumble on, and it will occasionally come up, but then just be forgotten. But they're actually really scary. And when you look at these things in more depth and you really drill into these, you realize just the sheer extent of what it actually signifies. There are two sort of things here that I've discussed on Relax Radio before, and I highly recommend that you go and watch them on the Relax Radio Facebook page. Scroll down for the George's Breakfast Buffet. In one episode, I reviewed a book called Arctic Dreams by Barry Lopez, which was written in the 1980s about the Arctic. And I also, way back in February, older show, but still, George's Breakfast Buffets generally I think are a bit evergreen. Talked about a story where the Antarctic Peninsula was experiencing record temperatures. However, let's dive into this story right now and really see what it means. The fact that the Arctic is melting and there's methane? What's that about? Don't worry though, the herbs are coming later. Scientists, says The Guardian, have found evidence that frozen methane deposits in the Arctic Ocean, known as, quote, the sleeping giants of the carbon cycle, unquote, have started to be released over a large area of the continental slope off the eastern Siberian coast, The Guardian can reveal. High levels of the potent greenhouse gas have been detected down to a depth of 350 meters in the Laptev Sea near Russia, promoting concern among researchers that a new climate feedback loop may have been triggered that could accelerate the pace of global warming. This is actually one story, which is a frankly terrifying story. But there's a lot more to it. The Arctic and Antarctica as well, though the Arctic is more relevant to what I'm thinking, actually does have a lot of, as I said, casually scary things going on in there, which we very, very rarely actually talk about. And I really did feel like that the Wednesday Whitterer today has to go into depth on this. I have to discuss this because it's important and it's something that is going to affect everyone. I'll keep going on the Guardian article. Just one last bit. The slope sediments in the Arctic contain a huge quantity of frozen methane and other gases, known as hydrates. Methane has a warming effect 80 times stronger than carbon dioxide over 20 years. The United States Geological Survey has previously listed Arctic hydrate destabilization as one of the 4 most serious scenarios of abrupt climate change. But what are those 4 scenarios? Well, I actually looked into what the scenario is and found that there's a very scary, if very controversial, theory on this. And I have to stress, before I dive into the Wikipedia article on it, that it is controversial and that there is still a lot of debate whether it will actually happen. But if it does happen, this story got a whole lot more scarier. It's called the Cliffrate Gun Hypothesis. And, anything that's like a gun hypothesis, you immediately know this is something that is low-key, just a little bit, scary. The Cliffrate Gun Hypothesis, says Wikipedia, refers to a proposed explanation for the period of rapid warming during the Quaternary. The idea is that changes in fluxes in upper intermediate waters in the ocean caused temperature fluctuations that alternately accumulated and occasionally released methane cliffrate on upper continental slopes. These events have caused the bond cycles and individual interstadial events, such as thing I'm not going to pronounce, but these kind of interstadial events. The hypothesis was supported for by various periods of time, but not for various other ones, although there are still debates on the topic. So what does all that mean? Basically, the most simple way of putting it, I've got a big picture that sort of is very, very helpful on the Wikipedia, is basically the fact that when the Earth cools down, generally kind of heavier gases tend to get trapped in ice formations when especially when like the upper levels of the ice sheet, you think of the Arctic Ocean, the whole of that ocean, or like the top part, the North Pole, it's all water, but you can walk on it because it's all frozen sea ice. Well, that kind of upper layer of water catches a lot of these sort of heavier gases, like methane. And so when that freezes, obviously, the methane freezes as well. There's also a lot of methane is also produced by bacteria that live, in the ground and underwater. However, of course, when these bacteria do produce the methane, when there's an ice sheet there, it can't go anywhere. It's stuck. It's trapped. It doesn't go anywhere, which is fantastic because it means that the Earth's temperature, doesn't warm up when this very, very potent greenhouse gas doesn't take place. But then when that does happen, when it does melt, the ice melts away, and that methane suddenly shoots up into the atmosphere. There, of course, it warms up the planet. As I said, it's a greenhouse gas, which then, of course, means that the Earth gets warmer. And because it's warmer, more ice melts. More ice melts, more methane releases. More and more and more and more of the stuff goes out, and it belches out and out and out. It causes a runaway greenhouse effect that in some simulations really does cause a catastrophic level. There's one simulation in particular that estimated that as much as 25% of the sort of biosphere, if I understand it correctly, and I'm not completely sure whether I do, would be at risk. As I said, though, it is still a controversial thing in some circles. But the truth still remains, though, that there is methane under that ice, and the ice is melting. And methane is very, very good at making sure that more ice melts. Of course, the fact of the matter is that methane is not the only thing that's in the ice that is cause for concern. I've got a story here from 2 years ago now, but the fact that it's happened highlights, though, the fact that what the danger is. It is in livescience.com. It's a 2018 article titled "Worms Frozen for 42,000 Years in Siberian Permafrost Wriggle to Life." Oh joy. Very interesting. It's one of those things that's very interesting, but I'll leave it to you to see what the thought of is. Did you ever wake up, says the livescience.com, from a really long nap, feeling a little disorientated, not quite knowing where you were? Now imagine getting a wake-up call after being asleep for 42,000 years. In Siberia, melting permafrost is releasing nematodes, which are microscopic worms that live in the soil, that have been suspended in a deep freeze since the Pleistocene. Despite being frozen for tens of thousands of years, 2 species of these worms were successfully revived, scientists reported in a new study, or a 2018 study. Though these nematodes were tiny, measuring typically about 1 millimeter in length, they were known to possess impressive abilities. Some were found living 0.8 miles, or in, actual real measurements, 1.3 kilometers, and no, I won't apologize for that, below the Earth's surface, deeper than any other multicellular animal. Certain worms that live on an island in the Indian Ocean can develop one of 5 different mouths, depending on what type of food it's eating. And of course, nematodes are not the only thing that's frozen in the Arctic. I mean, it stands to reason that if little worms that are 1 millimeter long can freeze in the Arctic, but then survive, there's something else that must survive, right? There's something else that could, actually survive. And the answer is yes. There's a lot of worries at the moment about a potential future pandemic. Why is that? Why do I say something that sounds so obviously sort of insane? Now, I had an article here, but I can't find it at the moment, which is a bit annoying. So I'll just go off what it was in memory. Basically, there's a lot of fears and worries now about the fact that if something as complex as a worm, a millimeter long worm, these are tiny little worms, but you can still see a millimeter. That still implies multicellular life. Now imagine single cellular life. Think bacteria. Think viruses. If a worm could survive being frozen, why couldn't a bacteria? There is in fact quite a bit of evidence to suggest that some bacteria and some viruses could in fact survive being frozen. That's blank 1. Blank 2 though, we know that there are people frozen in the ice in the Arctic. I mean, heck, there's all this talk, everybody thinks like, oh yeah, the Ice Age. What do you think when you first think Ice Age? For a lot of people, of course, the first image is going to be hunter-gatherers, primitive people wearing pelts, with stone spears, living in little tents made of mammoth tusks. Those people were real. In fact, even today, they're real. They're just, far north, in the far north of Canada, in the far north of Russia. There's a few people who live like that. Why? Except, of course, they don't use the mammoth tusks. What's to stop the thought that some of those people get sick, they die, and then get frozen over by the ice? And then what's to stop the thought that 20,000 years, 30, 40, 50,000 years later, the ice will melt, and suddenly those corpses of those people who died with diseases, suddenly that goes out to life. And suddenly there's the thought that those pathogens, those diseases, why would they inherently die from the cold? I mean, they probably will. But all it really takes is one of these diseases to not die, to infect someone, because our biology is basically the same, except we don't have the immunities to 50,000-year-old viruses anymore because we've not seen them in that time. Mate, that stuff's going to spread like wildfire, don't you think? Don't you think that that's a low-key, just a little low-key, very, very scary thought? And I know what you're thinking. Okay, George, you might be saying, I get it. the Arctic is melting. There's stuff in the ice that is being exposed now. It's going out into the atmosphere. It is getting out there that is, very, very undesirable to be out there. But surely there must be, some bits of good about that, right? Or at least maybe some reasons to hope. Perhaps. And I'll get into that a little bit after the break. But first I do have to stress that this is not to be underestimated. The fact of the matter is that we do have some very, very serious reasons to really, really start worrying about the Arctic and the fact that really climate change is screwing it up. And it's not screwing it up in 50 years' time. It's not screwing it up in 2090. It's screwing it up right now. The methane that was in the ice is being released from the ice right now. Those little worms that were in the ice have been revived. There are examples in the wild that are now presumably getting revived. And if little worms that are multicellular, fairly complex life can be revived, why couldn't single cell primitive bacteria or viruses? And that stuff is going to get out there, and as I've said on previous shows, which I do recommend you listen to and watch on the Relax Radio Facebook page, I really do fear for the future in a lot of areas. This is definitely one of them. But what do you think? If you think that I'm just being too much of some kind of a doom-monger or too scared on this whole subject, you can absolutely call the studio. The number is 07852 473 and 473. You are listening to Relax Radio, which is, of course, the best radio station for, well, just about everything, really. We do a lot here. We do like this factual programming, which I'm sure you love, and I'm very, very happy to do. But of course, we've also got spiritual people. We have people who do sport, music, the arts. So come on, even after this show, take a listen. I was just listening to Dominic's show, actually, before this. He does a show on art and spirituality. Really, really interesting. Really cool. Highly recommend. If you want to contact me, of course, the number is 07852 473 and 473. I also have got, of course, the Facebook live stream running in the near future. And I always make sure to check the comments and always make sure to have a read and find out what you have to say. However, in the meantime, I have the feeling that some other people really want to have a talk. They've been unfrozen. They've been thawed from the ice in the Arctic. And now they really, really want to have a word. Catch you all again very, very soon. And see you around.
Whoa, Relax Radio. আপনি হয়তোবা জানেন না যে রেডিও অ্যাডভার্টাইজমেন্ট is 4 times more powerful than any other media. রিল্যাক্স রেডিওতে যদি অ্যাডভার্টাইজ করতে চান তাহলে আমাদেরকে আজই যোগাযোগ করুন on 020-7474-9292. আমাদের সাথে অ্যাডভার্টাইজ করুন from £99 a month. Increase your business by advertising on Relax Radio.
It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. So listen to us, 24 hours, and let the happiness come to you on Relax Radio. Tune in to Relax Radio.
It has been too long. No one has taken the initiative to know who you are and what you do. Well, Relax proudly presents Relax Media to unite and expose all media-related personalities under one umbrella. If you are an artist or maybe you're looking for one, look no further. Log on to www.relaxmedia.com, RELAKS media.com. In return, you get a free webpage and exposure to wider fan appreciation and contacts. Also, optional personal manager. Don't delay. Relax Radio.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Wednesday Whitterer with George Shaft. I have been tapping this button for the music and getting this little tune I've not heard in a while. I quite like it, so I think I'll be using it more. But in the meantime, I want to go back to the doom and gloom that was happening. But don't worry, I will be talking, of course, about herbs, my full 1 hour special later. First though, I want to continue and briefly touch back on what I was talking about before, which is the Arctic. And the fact that the Arctic is melting. Because we don't really talk enough about it. We kind of just have this idea, it's like, oh, there's like a lot of ice there, right? And a lot of snow. And we don't think about it. But it's important. And it's important for, well, a variety of reasons. I'm going to quickly go to the Weather Channel, actually, of all places. And last year, they had an article that was titled, Arctic Permafrost Melting 70 Years Sooner Than Expected, Study Finds. And I'm going to bring this up for a very specific reason, but let's see what it is. Scientists studying climate change expected layers of permafrost in the Canadian Arctic to melt by the year 2090. Instead, it's happening right now. A new study, or 2019 study, published in the Journal of Geophysical Research Letters, revealed that unusually warm summers in the Canadian high Arctic between 2003 and 2016 resulted in permafrost melting up to 240% higher than previous years. Louis Farquharson, I'm going to leave it at that. A researcher at the Permafrost Laboratory at the University of Alaska Fairbanks and the study's lead author told Weather.com that the three areas of melting permafrost studied in the remote northern Canada are believed to have been frozen for thousands of years. This change is unprecedented on this kind of time scale, she noted. She also noted that while scientists had predicted that the permafrost wouldn't melt for another 70 years, those forecasts didn't take into account the unusually warm summers that had happened in recent years. Okay. Who cares, you might think, right? So it's like, okay, well, the ice is melting, and so is the permafrost. But do you understand what that means? What is permafrost? And why am I so concerned? Well, here's an image for you. Imagine some grassland. Imagine this grassland gets rained on. It's Yorkshire, it's Britain. It gets a bit of rain. But what happens when the sun comes out? Well, normally that water just evaporates and goes off. But in the very, very far north, it gets so cold that, when it does rain, or more likely snow, the water just kind of seeps into the ground and then just freezes, and it stays there. And the very, very composition of the ground itself will be partly ice. Now, this is cool and all, except, of course, when you have the situation of rapidly accelerating global warming that is melting that ice away. And this is causing quite a bit of a few issues. the first one I want to talk about is a little story that's... And this is, in fact, a story that kind of triggered in my mind the idea that I should talk about the Arctic. It is in Forbes.com from September, so just recently, say, mysterious craters in Siberia linked to melting permafrost. What? Hang on. Mysterious craters, what does that mean? So, in June 2017, a reindeer herder in the Yamal Peninsula of northwest Siberia, Russia, reported a loud blast and smoke rising from the ground. Later, a crater with a diameter of 7 meters and almost 20 meters deep, surrounded by blocks and chunks of ice and soil, was discovered at the supposed explosion site. However, these were not really exactly a blast, and nor was it isolated. Since then, scientists have identified 17 other large craters. Many seem to be filled with peated water, and the locals refer to them now as black holes. The newest crater appeared earlier this summer in an undisclosed location in the Yamal Peninsula. It is by far the largest in terms of both depth, at 31 meters, and in diameter. But okay, what's all that about then? Well, according to Forbes, scientists think that the craters are caused by the buildup of methane gas in pockets of falling permafrost under the surface. So remember what I was discussing earlier. The methane is falling out of the ice and going into the atmosphere. But don't forget, of course, that I mentioned that a lot of the methane is made by bacteria that live underground. Normally, it's just underground and doesn't go anywhere. But when the ice that holds it there melts away, or weakens rather, suddenly the ground's not going to be able to hold it for that much longer. And in fact, this is one of the reasons why, and basically permafrost melting in general, is the reason why you should not buy, as I found very, very unfortunately, Bloomberg reporting, the argument of that there's benefits to climate change. You see, the main argument that's put forward for it is like, oh, there's loads of new land up in the Arctic, in Siberia, in the north of Canada, that we could all use if it all just melted, if all the ice just melted. The Bloomberg article, it was 2020 in July, and it's talking about, its quote is, Russia's permafrost is melting and its farmers are cashing in. And the article is basically about how farmers who live just south of the the permafrost are now growing, soybeans because they can. The temperatures are no longer so cold that it would kill soybeans immediately. It's one of many stories that have a similar kind of idea. Britain, for example, is starting to grow wine, grapes, because since the temperature has been warming up steadily in Britain over the past couple of decades, it means that suddenly the prospects of British wine country doesn't seem irrational anymore. But that has a limit. That can't go on for all of it. Because you see, yes, there are cold places that do not, that could grow more food, more different varieties of food, because they were very cold until very recently, we couldn't do it. Another place like that, for example, is North Dakota is now starting to grow wheat, because before then North Dakota was too cold for wheat. But with the warming temperatures, North Dakota's trying. But notice that none of those areas are the actual Arctic. None of those are the actual Siberia itself, the really cold places, the bits that, have all this methane in it. Instead, that land, which nowadays we actually can use a bit. I mean, not many people like it, but that's mostly because of the weather. To which, in fairness, I can't blame them. It's cold, it's miserable, it's dark for 6 months of the year. But now remember, there's the explosion. All that methane that was in the ground, that was frozen in the permafrost, it has to come out somehow. And it's coming out with a bang, with a blast. But it's not the only thing that is making that land, frankly, completely useless. No, even when it does melt. I have Risnet, another, the Canadian Press has an article from August that was titled, Climate Change Creating Vast New Glacial Lakes with Risk of Gargantuan Floods, researchers say. The meltwater from shrinking glaciers is creating vast lakes that could eventually pose an enormous flooding threat, says a newly published research. The fact that these glaciers around the world are shrinking due to climate change is well established. What hasn't been so well established is where all that water is going. In a paper published in the Nature Climate Change, Sugar, who's the name of the sort of head researcher, and his colleagues provided the first global assessment of how much water is contained in so-called glacial lakes and how quickly that volume is increasing. That assessment wasn't possible until a few years ago, when computers finally became powerful enough to work through the world's worth of data and 250,000 satellite images. What he found was the fact that glacial lakes form when meltwater was the fact that these glacial lakes were forming and that their volume was calculated to be, in some cases, almost unimaginable 158 cubic kilometers of water. That's a cube of icy water worth almost 5.5 kilometers long, wide and high. Many of these glacial lakes are located in thinly inhabited areas such as Greenland. However, others are in places like the Himalayas, where they actually do sit along some pretty heavily populated places. Yeah, by the way, all the stuff that I've been saying about the Arctic, it applies to high mountains too. Just as an FYI, just a casual little thing, in case you're thinking, the Arctic's far away. No. If you live in mountains, if you're rich enough to have a mountain chalet, no, this applies to you too. So there's a fun one for you. Looking at the whole population of Switzerland, glacial lakes are swelling, basically everywhere. Their volume across the country, in Canada specifically, including those in the high Arctic, has increased by about 20%, and they hold about 37 cubic kilometers of water, said Dan Sugar. The lakes in British Columbia and Yukon Peninsula have increased even more quickly, and almost doubling in volume over the past 30 years to 21 cubic kilometers. Yikes. Okay. He even called them in the study absolutely gargantuan. But don't worry. Even if you somehow find a way to make the land that was formerly permafrost usable without exploding on you, without having the land get flooded by essentially flash floods, because the article goes on to describe various kind of flash floods. But hey, remember when I was saying what permafrost is? When the ice is soaked into the ground and it's frozen. That's what compacts the earth at that point. It's the thing that's holding the ground together. Now think for a moment, what happens when ice melts? There's a little fun experiment I've done, which I do recommend to people, is to fill up a bottle of water. This works especially well with hot water, but it doesn't have to be hot water. Maybe about 2/3 of the way up, halfway, then put it in the freezer overnight. Take it out. What do you find? Well, what you will find often is a bottle of frozen water. Sounds innocent enough. If you've put in like a one of those like bottles of like soda or Evian, Vittel, other brands of water included. Seems to be no problem, right? Now forward again. One thing you'll often notice happening is that that really weak, kind of small bottles, crumple up. Why do they do that? Well, because the water starts to absorb the air, and also, the thing that was holding the bottle in shape at that point was the fact that it had expanded out with all that ice. Water is very unusual, because when it freezes, it actually expands. Very, very few materials do that, but water is one of them. What do you think happens on the grand scale then, when the ice melts? Oh yeah, it contracts. What happens to the dirt that had been expanded by all that ice when it was freezing over? It also contracts. And I've not got any specific articles on it. I don't really have the time for it at the moment, but cities and towns that are in the kind of Arctic are actually collapsing right in front of our eyes, because the very ground that they were built on is itself collapsing into a wet, soggy, marshy peat, basically. And ultimately, that's the rub when it comes to the Arctic and global warming. Sure, if your place is cold but not Arctic, you may be able to grow a few new crops with warmer temperatures. Absolutely true. But that's not as much of a silver lining as you might think. And the fact of the matter is that if you go further north than that, really, the ground itself is turning to be completely, almost unusable, useless. Because you can't walk in it. It's a marsh. It's a bog. Shout out, by the way, to my friend Martin, who said he would be listening today. He knows actually very well how hard it is to walk on a marsh, because we actually did that together once. It's almost impossible. Now expand to that thought, of walking on marshy, soggy, wet ground, and have it be all of the areas that used to be frozen. Yeah, you're not getting much agriculture done. You're not growing much there. And in the meantime, we've got more methane out there, potentially a new plague, all sorts of lovely, duddy, nice things, which I'm sure someone out there has called a good time. What do you think? I'm really curious to hear what you have to say. The number, by the way, is 07852 473 and 473. I will repeat, just in case you didn't catch it. The number is 07852 473 and 473. But first, I think some other people really want to have a chat. So I've been told. So I'll catch you all again very, very soon. See ya.
Whoa, relax radio.
আপনি হয়তোবা জানেন না যে রেডিও অ্যাডভার্টাইজমেন্ট ইজ 4 times more powerful than any other media. রিল্যাক্স রেডিওতে যদি অ্যাডভার্টাইজ করতে চান তাহলে আমাদেরকে আজই যোগাযোগ করুন on 020-7474-9292. আমাদের সাথে অ্যাডভার্টাইজ করুন from £99 a month. Increase your business by advertising on Relax Radio.
It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. So listen to us, 24 hours, and let the happiness come to you on Relax Radio. Tune in to Relax Radio.
It has been too long. No one has taken the initiative to know who you are and what you do. Well, Relax proudly presents Relax Media to unite and expose all media-related personalities under one umbrella. If you are an artist, or maybe you're looking for one, look no further. Log on to www.relaxmedia.com, RELAKS media.com. In return, you get a free webpage and exposure to wider fan appreciation and contacts. Also, optional personal manager. Don't delay.
Relax Radio.
Oh, listen to that. I do quite like this little track, and one thing I should really do for the Wednesday Whitterer is, I should really just get more of appreciation for, some of the finer things in life. Some of the things that make life worth living. One of those things, of course, is, some good food. I really like, good food. Do you? If you do, call the studio. The number is 07852 473 and 473. I'll repeat, just in case. The number is 07852 473 and 473. And you know what really, really makes some food extra good? That little bit of pitch perfect thing. It can even, in my experience, often save a meal that would otherwise be bland and horrible and miserable. And that would be herbs. But what are herbs? This is actually something that I not only was very curious about when it did occur, but actually found surprisingly little that really actually did, in one consolidated place, go like, hey, what actually are herbs? So welcome to that creation. Here's a little image I'm going to paint to you. Imagine you go off on maybe some holiday, if you live in London, or if you live maybe out in the countryside, just go outside. And you find yourself in the forest. I love forests. Forests are fantastic places. Strictly during the daytime, though, by the way. Forests at night are scary. But during the daytime, forests are lovely places. And one of the main reasons why is because there's just so many plants everywhere. You'll see, of course, very, very prominently, one type of kind of big category of plant, which are trees. Huge, hard-wooded plants with these incredibly tough trunks. They grow meters and meters in height, and they live forever. Those are trees. But of course, trees are not the only plants that exist. There are many, many, many different varieties of plants out there. For example, you might bump into a smaller plant, maybe, as high as you are, perhaps. Bit kind of round, bushy. Those are, but kind of still woody. Still kind of hard, often very prickly, I find in my experience. Well, those are shrubs. Those are bushes. And, that's cool. What happens when you get smaller than that? What about those really, really small plants? The little weeds that grow between the sides. Those, like those little rocks in the pavement. I'm thinking in central London. They have this whole way of making it of the big slabs of stone. What about the little plants that grow in between these? Some of those are very, very rough. Very, very kind of, I forget the kind of word. I'd say sinewy if it was meat, but it's not because it's a plant. But, kind of like that. Well, those are grasses. Reeds. But, again, that doesn't explain every plant that would grow in those places. Welcome to the world of herbs and spices, and the myriad, numerous ways in which these plants actually work out. But first, I actually want to do a little bit of a kind of a step back when it comes to that, because of course I have a source. I of course have got a little article by The Spruce Eats, which I love the kind of idea of the name, because I just imagine a spruce tree especially if it's like the spruce tree from Minecraft, with like a big fork eating things. But anyway, they had a very, very convenient little guide, updated actually pretty recently, which is of course titled, What are herbs? And how are they different from spices? Which seems like a very, very convenient little place to start this discussion. In the culinary arts, says The Spruce Eats, the word herb refers to any green or leafy part of a plant used for seasoning and flavouring a recipe. More on that later, by the way, because there's a little bit of an interesting thing on that. Anyway, but, very importantly, it is not used as the main ingredient. But what exactly does that mean? Here's an example, just to illustrate the kind of artificial definition we often have when it comes to classifying plants in the sort of popular memory. Spinach is the green part of a plant, but spinach is considered to be a vegetable, not a herb, because spinach is prepared as the food itself, not merely to add flavouring to another food. Similarly, the leaf of lettuce is the green part of a plant, but when you make a salad, lettuce is in fact the main ingredient, so lettuce isn't a herb either. That's very curious, and it's one of those little things. Just before I even continue, I just find it so interesting how we often have these kind of artificial categories in our minds. It's like, oh yeah, no. My classic one favorite is what's a vegetable, what's a fruit? It's like, oh yeah, tomatoes are vegetables, but except of course when you look into science and realize that they're actually biologically fruit. But there's this great little quote I saw once that went, knowledge is knowing that tomato is a fruit. Wisdom, on the other hand, is knowing not to put it in fruit salad. Anyway, herbs are plants with a fragrant or aromatic properties. That means, of course, that you can smell them. Herbs can be used to flavour food, included in fragrances, and even a part of natural medicines. More on that later. Basil, parsley, rosemary, thyme, and the dill are all herbs. Note that for each of these, the herb is the green or leafy part of the plant. And in the case of basil, the leaves can be quite large, whereas in rosemary leaves, they're more like spines in an evergreen plant. Okay. Final point on that, of course, is the thought of alright, I mentioned spices, right? What are spices? Luckily, the Spruce Eats is very, very convenient on this too. The essential difference between herbs and spices lies in what part of the plant they originate from. A herb is from the leaf or the other green plant part of the plant. And any other element, meanwhile, of that plant would be considered a spice, including dried bark, the roots, the berries, seeds, twigs, or other plant matter that would be used, of course, as seasoning or to flavour a dish. For example, just to really illustrate how much of a, if you will, how much of a kind of a Goliath that actually was to really take on, yes, give me mercy points, give me sympathy points, is cinnamon. Cinnamon is the bark of a tree, but cardamom is a seed pod. Allspice is the dried berry. Cloves, on the other hand, are the dried flower buds. Now, all of those are the spices. But of course, note that some of these are, those kinds of brown or other coloured parts of the plant. But then the leaves could itself be considered a herb. By the way, most of the time they are served either fresh or dried in the case of herbs. What do you mean? What do I mean by served? Well, I think that's pretty obvious actually. But, I think the better question then is, when were they served? Who would want such a thing? Who would want the leaves of plants, growing in the sidewalk on their food? Well, the answer is actually quite a lot of people, including myself. But especially, These people who are actually just about to talk, they're fascinating. But I will update them soon, by the way. Anyway, catch you all again very, very soon.
Whoa, relax radio.
আপনি হয়তোবা জানেন না যে রেডিও অ্যাডভার্টাইজমেন্ট ইজ 4 times more powerful than any other media. রিল্যাক্স রেডিওতে যদি অ্যাডভার্টাইজ করতে চান তাহলে আমাদেরকে আজই যোগাযোগ করুন on 020-7474-9292. আমাদের সাথে অ্যাডভার্টাইজ করুন from £99 a month. Increase your business by advertising on Relax Radio.
It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. So listen to us, 24 hours, and let the happiness come to you on Relax Radio. Tune in to Relax Radio.
It has been too long. No one has taken the initiative to know who you are and what you do. Well, Relax proudly presents Relax Media to unite and expose all media-related personalities under one umbrella. If you are an artist or maybe you're looking for one, look no further. Log on to www.relaxmedia.com, RELAKS media.com. In return, you get a free webpage and exposure to wider fan appreciation and contacts. Also, optional personal manager. Don't delay.
Relax radio.
Hello and hi again. Let's just dive straight into this. 70,000 years ago, about that long ago, in Shanida, which is in Iraq nowadays, 10 people died. Very, very tragic for the people who were around them. And so they decided to give these people a burial. And when they buried these dead folks, they decided to give them a bit of a send-off. And they put flowers with the dead. Now, it's one of those things that doesn't really, it's one of those sort of things that doesn't really occur to you in the normal sense, or at least to me. But technically, that is in fact the earliest known use of herbs in human history. Or should I say Neanderthal history, because they were literally Neanderthals in this time, 70,000 years ago. And boom, they are burying their dead with flowers, with herbs. Herbs, of course, as a condiment, as something being eaten, is meanwhile a very, very long history indeed. The ancient Greeks provide a lot of evidence and a lot of testimony to the use of herbs. Saffron, for example, which is kind of like a little bit of spice that's like a little bit of stalks from flowers, has been grown in the Greek islands for 4,000 years, maybe longer. Thyme, basil, and what was the other one? Rosemary, I believe it was, has also been grown in the Mediterranean, in like Egypt as well, for 5,000 years. There's evidence of trade for spices in particular. Things like for nutmeg and for mixes of curries, for peppers, that have traces of it that go even as far back as one source I found that said 2,500 BC. It's clear that people around the world like their food to have a little bit of an extra. But they don't just like it for no reason. Have you ever walked into an Indian restaurant, or maybe a Bangladeshi restaurant, and tried the food? Have you ever noticed that the food is often very spicy? It often has a lot of stuff in it, to really kind of spice things up and to really cut into your tongue. Have you meanwhile done the opposite, maybe gone into a British fish and chips shop and found that if you're not getting vinegar with your fish, what are you even doing? That's not an accident. That's in fact a result of a very simple truth. Plants which are small and don't have bark, like a big mighty tree, get eaten. I mean, that's just a fact. There are lots of animals and lots of insects out there that like eating plants. But plants don't like being eaten themselves. It's, they kind of have a bit of an issue with it. So they try to defend themselves. Now, if you're a rose bush, say, if you're a bush, a shrub, one option is to have spines, really spiky stuff. Spikes are a good idea if you're a plant that wants to defend itself. But they can't be the whole story. And they can't work for very, very small plants indeed. But you know what could work? Poison. It works for, well, a huge myriad of animals after all. Jellyfish have figured out that venom can be used to kill and then eat prey. So why shouldn't a plant? And indeed, many, many, many plants go for this route. And they try to, in fact, put in poison. But different plants will use slightly different mixes. And they'll use slightly different chemicals to try and achieve that poisonous effect. And it's very effective, a lot of the time actually, against insects. But then when we, humans, 100 times larger than the ants that they're trying to ward off, go get the thing, we smell it and go, interesting. Mint, actually, I found out much to my delight, is an example of this happening. When you go and chew gum, a mint gum, you get that really fresh feeling. And then when you breathe it out, you get that sort of minty smell. And it's so good, so delicious. It turns out that humans are literally the only animal that actually enjoys that sensation. Basically everything else. Birds hate it. Deer hate it. Insects hate it. But we love mint. And that's why we cultivate it and eat it and put it on our lamb. However, there's a reason why we put it on our lamb. There's a reason we put it on our food in the first place. And it is to do with the fact that all those other animals don't like mint. The same is, by the way, true of other things. But why? Well, let's imagine that you're a person living in Bangladesh, but you are living in the year 500 BC. You have got some food. Maybe you've grown a nice batch of rice. Maybe you have just hunted a really beautiful deer. But you can't eat all of that all at once. But you also don't want it to go rotten. Now, if you live further north, the idea of something going rotten is less of a problem. Because when food is scarce, in the winter time, it becomes scarce because it's cold. And you can just leave food outside and it'll be fine. I, in fact, myself have very fond memories, living in Northern Europe and in the winter, just leave food outside. The winter will freeze the food for me. But you can't do that as the ancient person living in Bangladesh. You have to find another way to preserve the food so you can eat it later. Well, think about it. Lots and lots of small plants out there. All of them don't want to be eaten. And so they're using chemical warfare to keep the insects away. They have strong smells, strong tastes, but they're not for you. No, to ward you off. You're fine eating them. I think you can see where this is going. And it's not an accident that herbs, spices are ubiquitous across cuisine in places like India, North Africa, actually Southern Africa as well. In Mexico, there's lots and lots of plants out there. All of them don't want to be eaten. Some of them using chemical warfare, which are just delicious when you put them on your food. And as a bonus, when you covered your food in, say, some hot Cajun, let's go with like Cajun hot peppers, the little red ones. This would be in the Amazonia, where it was originally from. Hey, you put it on your food. The food doesn't go rotten for 6 months, and then when you eat it, it tastes delicious. It tastes of the little herb, of the little thing. It's fantastic. But of course, we did have to figure all of that out through trial and error. And often even very similar plants will give you very, very different results. I've pulled up the Encyclopedia Britannica to go into more depth on this. In particular, I decided to choose parsley. The Encyclopedia Britannica, by the way, has this big list, and it's a mind-bogglingly large list, that's all about the different kinds of herbs and spices that exist. It's too long a list to ever do any justice on a radio show. So I decided to choose one, because I knew what it was and thought, this will be interesting. It's parsley. Parsley, or as Latin incoming, Petrosilium crispum, is a hardy biennial herb of the family Apiaceae, or Umbelliferaceae, which is native to Mediterranean lands. Parsley leaves were used by the ancient Greeks and Romans as a flavoring and garnish for foods. The compound leaves, which are dark green, tender, and curled or deeply frilled, that develop in a cluster the first season of growth, are used fresh or dried and are mildly aromatic in flavor, being popular to put with fish, meats, soups, sauces, and salads. Parsley is in fact often a principal ingredient for a great many dishes. But parsley is not the end of the story there. After all, it's one plant. What about the family Apiaceae, though? Here's when we get something more interesting. Apiaceae, or the Umbelliferaceae, which is the parsley family, is an order of plants that comprises of between 300 and 400 genera of plants, which are distributed widely throughout the world, mostly in the northern temperate zones of the world. Most of these plants are aromatic, so they have smells, herbs, and they have the same kind of idea with the leaves, that they alternate with kind of feather divided leaves, and they often use chemical warfare, to the point actually where loads of them are actually really poisonous, including hemlock. That's right, hemlock is actually a parsley. Hemlock, the deadly poison, is actually a herb. Poison hemlock, water hemlock, and fool's parsley are all dangerous, poisonous plants that are still, though, technically count as herbs for that very last meal of your life. However, of course, since most of the time we're dealing with plants that are trying to, poison beetles, not people, we end up with, well, frankly, a huge variety of plants that are believed, which are actually pretty nice to eat, including parsley itself, but also celery, parsnip, and fennel. By the way, fun fact on fennel, which I found so incredibly precious. I have to bring it in. So, have you ever run a marathon? I know this is a distraction, but I have to. Have you ever run a marathon? What does marathon mean? Well, it's pretty popular knowledge. A lot of people know anyway that marathon is named after a battle, right? You know, those the ancient Greeks, they fought this big battle against the Persians at this place called Marathon. And, you know, then they sent a guy to run all the way to Athens to tell everybody. And he ran 42 kilometers and then died when he arrived. All right. But let's take a step further back. What was Marathon itself? Why was the place called Marathon? The answer was actually, it's called Marathon because it was a field with loads of fennel on it. So yes, when you are running a marathon, you are actually, by literal translations, running a field of fennel. Doesn't that sound so stupid when you just say it like that? But it's in fact like the literal translations of what you're saying. When you say someone is running a marathon, they are running a field of fennel. Just a little aside, not the main story, but I just have to include it because it was so beautifully funny. Anyway, other species of herbs and spices that are within the kind of parsley family include coriander, caraway, cumin, and dill. Yeah, parsley, that's a lot of plants, isn't it? And that's just one of the things I clicked on the list from the Encyclopedia Britannica. There is a vast variety of different plants that can be used as herbs. Assuming, of course, that you're not picking the poisonous ones. Here on the Wednesday Whitterer, we do not endorse, in fact, ingesting poisons. Eating poisons turns out, very bad for you. But do you disagree? Do you like cooking with herbs? Then this next segment is really going to be for you. Call the studio. The number is 07852 473 and 473. This is, of course, listening to Relax Radio. We are going live and fun all over the Facebooks. And, well, I hope to catch you very, very soon after these other people start talking. See ya.
Whoa, Relax Radio.
আপনি হয়তোবা জানেন না যে রেডিও অ্যাডভার্টাইজমেন্ট is 4 times more powerful than any other media. রিল্যাক্স রেডিওতে যদি অ্যাডভার্টাইজ করতে চান তাহলে আমাদেরকে আজই যোগাযোগ করুন on 020-7474-9292. আমাদের সাথে অ্যাডভার্টাইজ করুন from £99 a month. Increase your business by advertising on Relax Radio.
It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. So listen to us here 24 hours and let the happiness come to you on Relax Radio. Tune in to Relax Radio.
It has been too long. No one has taken the initiative to know who you are and what you do. Well, Relax proudly presents Relax Media to unite and expose all media-related personalities under one umbrella. If you are an artist or maybe you're looking for one, look no further. Log on to www.relaxmedia.com. RELAKS media.com. In return, you get a free webpage and exposure to wider fan appreciation and contacts. Also, optional personal manager. Don't delay.
Relax Radio.
Alright, so, hello, welcome back again to the Wednesday Whitterer. My name is George Shaft, and, well, I've just been talking for ages about herbs. I've been talking about, their history, their biology, spices. You might be thinking, or I know I certainly have this feeling of just like, oh, isn't that just so good? I like, for example, really like big mixes of herbs. You get like in shops, these little bottles are like mixed herbs. I'm all about that. They pack in parsley, basil, thyme. I know that in one mix in particular they had oregano as well. It's just like all put together, all crushed, and then you put it out there. Sometimes maybe a bit of bay leaf as well, and it's just it's so good. But, well, what about actually having that? Because, well, remember what I was saying at the beginning. I'm going to call this like the Wednesday Whitterer kind of recall, because let's have the recall. I've covered the fact that herbs and spices are the general sort of catch-all terms especially in cooking, for very small plants that don't have hard woody exteriors, though some spices. But using spices as well, I will admit, I do kind of muddy things up a bit, because some spices are literally the bark of trees. Anyway, but herbs are like the little green plants, the very small ones. I've covered the fact that they have a very ancient history, with people eating them for thousands of years. I've talked about the fact that they have smells that are very pleasant to humans, or in the ones we eat anyway, but the reason that they're there is because they're basically chemical warfare against insects. I've also talked about, of course, the fact they're from many places in the world. Different varieties have grown in as varied places as India, Northern Africa, and Mexico. But that's not all there is to it, isn't there? There is, of course, a very, very important question. And that's what we're going to eat. How are we going to get them? Well, luckily, there's actually a very, very fun little thing, and my mother is a huge fan of doing this. She does this a lot. Is you can grow them. Now, different herbs will have different growing kind of, if you will, requirements, different growing needs. But there is a huge amount of resources out there. Mostly in video form, which was really actually kind of annoying for this part, because otherwise I would just be... So, by the way, just before I dive in further, I would like to mention that Martin, who I gave a little shout out to before, has in fact interacted, and I will say, yes, coriander is pretty good. I do quite like coriander. And also oregano is in fact one of the best. Anyway, that distraction aside, I would like to just say that it's like the most important part really, when you want to, make your own herbs, make your own spices, is to really do your research. As I said, most of the different ones were in video form. And so there is going to be a bit of a limit as to how to, hang on, I'm just sort of Googling something quickly because I've realised that I had a little oversight. So let's go on this little magical adventure. Basically what I was going to do was go with my little example of parsley, which is cool and all, except I've forgotten the little question of having an actual article on how to grow parsley. So I'm just going to do a quick little cheeky thing. There we are. We have WikiHow. WikiHow I've always found is pretty helpful. So as I said, my example though as a representative of what herbs are has been parsley, because parsley is a wide category, or it's part of a wide category of different herbs, and it's just very representative. I thought a lot about talking about basil too, because I love basil. Great plant. And in fact, it's one of the plants that my mother grows very regularly. And, I have some very fond memories of just like chopping off like a little leaf from the plant and then just eating it directly. It's great. But how would you grow parsley? Because, you want to finish off your little salad. You want that little extra, that little the little smell, the extra taste, the extra little thing. Or maybe even just keep it safe from parasites and insects because you live in the 1400s. Hey, I'm not judging. First of all, says Wikipedia, how is to choose a type of parsley. Remember, as I said, there are many, many different varieties of parsley. However, the two that it's going to talk about are the curly leaf and flat leaf parsley. Flat leaf parsley is also, by the way, also known as Italian parsley. Anyway, first you decide what you want to grow, and then you get ready for it. You get your seed. Then you grow it. Parsley is actually one that works very well, in particular, in just about any garden or pot, because it's a pretty hardy plant. And this is something I already knew from like the previous research. It's actually a pretty hardy plant, and it's a plant that can grow just about anywhere. That said, of course, different varieties of herbs and spices will have different requirements, as I've said before. Some of them are actually very, very finicky. I believe there's one, saffron, for example, from what I gather, is a pretty finicky and fussy little plant that, especially because you're taking like a tiny little part of it. It's why it's actually a super expensive spice. Anyway, so you get your parsley. Let's just say you put it on a flower pot. If you decide to pot the parsley, place it on a windowsill that gets morning sunlight, such as an eastern-facing window. Then, after that, you've got your soil. The soil has to be relatively loose, full of compost or nutrients, and it should have a pH level between 6 and 7 to be perfect for parsley. You can test the pH of the soil, of course, and a nice way of sort of getting a bit of extra to make it, if it's too basic, is to have some peat moss in there, which is actually a little thing that I've noticed works for a lot of plants. I used to have a little Venus's flytrap, but pitcher plant, which I really liked, but unfortunately neglected ones. And it had some peat moss there as well to make the sort of soil really work. Anyway, the soil itself should be kind of light and airy, so that it makes it really easy for the roots of the parsley to grow. Because remember, small plant, small roots, can be kind of tricky. Anyway, the best way of doing it, according to it, is to rinse the seeds. You make them wet so that they will actually grow. Then you plant them after they're in good sort of conditions. You plant the seed. The plant will grow. According to WikiHow, when you use a small trowel for if you're thinking the garden, you make rows in the garden of approximately 10 to 12 inches, or if you're a civilized person, 25.4 to 30.5 centimeters apart, and long enough apart so that the seeds could be strewn on a 3-inch interval. The seeds, sprouts, need to only be covered with about half an inch of dirt. That's what, like 3-4 centimeters of dirt? Really, really little. These are small plants. Again, they don't need to be very, very deep. Then make sure you water it. You make sure you have to. Watering it is very important for just about any plant, but it's especially true for these small little weak plants. Water your parsley deeply at least once a week to encourage the development of a deep and a long taproot. The taproot, by the way, is actually a very distinguishing feature of parsley plants, and the most famous example of that is, fun fact, carrots. Yes, actually, carrots are a member of the same family as parsley is. But with carrots, we don't eat the leaves, we eat the root. Whereas with parsley itself, we eat the leaves and not the root. But we could actually theoretically eat both. They're just not that good. Just a little fun fact there for you to realise, like, the distinction between what's a herb and a spice and a vegetable, it really is so arbitrary. Because biologically, a carrot is in fact a herb. It's just a different part of the plant. Anyway, you may need to water the plant more frequently if you're planting your parsley in a very, very hot and dry place. If you're watering your parsley in pots indoors, you give them enough water so that the soil is just barely moist. Consider setting up a drip system if you're unable to water the parsley regularly. After that, it's important to get rid of weeds. Weeds can easily blend in with the parsley, but they take up valuable nutrients and block out the sunlight. Mulch around the plants and to help the soil retain its moisture and discourage weed growth. Further, pull any weeds on site and dispose of them far away from your garden. Then, of course, if it is in a garden, you have to thin them out. Along the way, seedlings will need to be thinned out so that there is only one plant for every 8 to 10 inches. Once the seeds start to develop into plants, go through with a pair of scissors and snip on some of the smaller or the less healthy looking plants right down to the soil. If you want to transplant these seeds to a different location, you can in fact carefully dig them out. But then you continue adding nutrients. I actually talked in the last episode of the Wednesday Whitterer on Relax Radio, the best little radio station, about one of those important nutrients, which is phosphorus. Only on Relax Radio, of course, on the Facebook page, also on YouTube, on Twitch, just everywhere. Anyway, fertilize the soil at least once a month for parsley to get the best results. You can use general purpose fertilizer for it. You can be, it just needs that little boost. You can also add compost to the soil to help keep it full of nutrients. Now, again, it's all about perfecting it. Once it's all done, you can harvest the parsley, which, when it sprouts out, you look for when it sprouts with like three sets of 3 leaves. Why is that so hard to say? Anyway, sets of 3 leaves that are fully developed, and then you pick them. You harvest the parsley slowly throughout the season by cutting the outer stalks of the plant just above the ground level so that you can encourage additional growth. Harvesting the leaves from the top of the plant, meanwhile, will reduce the yield in the long term. Once you have got your little parsley plant leaves, though, well, for parsley in particular, you can just eat it straight up, and it's delicious. Same as with basil. But you can also dry them. A really good way I found to dry them was basically what you did was you put them in like an electric heater, and then you just leave it for like 2 days. Like those little heaters that you put for like, warming a chair, that kind of thing. Just leave it on that. Leave it for like a day. Boom, when you get back, it should be completely dried up. When herbs are dry and ready to, sprinkle on things. When you touch them, they should crumble. That's a great thing for them. And it's one of the sensations I really love about like the mixed herbs, is they always have like these very, very dried up things. You press and you hear like a little crunch, crunch, crunch. And then you sprinkle all over your food. It's so delicious. And I'm getting really hungry talking about this, just talking about this straight subject. And to the point where there's so much that I actually do want to cover as well, but can't because, other people want to talk. Let's hear what they have to say. I'll catch you all again very, very soon.
Whoa, Relax Radio.
আপনি হয়তোবা জানেন না যে রেডিও অ্যাডভার্টাইজমেন্ট ইজ 4 times more powerful than any other media. রিল্যাক্স রেডিওতে যদি অ্যাডভার্টাইজ করতে চান তাহলে আমাদেরকে আজই যোগাযোগ করুন on 020-7474-9292. আমাদের সাথে অ্যাডভার্টাইজ করুন from £99 a month. Increase your business by advertising on Relax Radio.
It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. So listen to us here 24 hours and let the happiness come to you on Relax Radio. Tune in to Relax Radio.
It has been too long. No one has taken the initiative to know who you are and what you do. Well, Relax proudly presents Relax Media to unite and expose all media-related personalities under one umbrella. If you are an artist or maybe you're looking for one, look no further. Log on to www.relaxmedia.com. RELAKS media.com. In return, you get a free webpage and exposure to wider fan appreciation and contacts. Also, optional personal manager. Don't delay.
Relax Radio.
Herbs, according to the Urban Dictionary, are desperately uncool and people who deserve to be mocked and scorned and have all sorts of terrible things. In particular, the exact quote is, "A herb is to be whack, worthy of being mocked, weak, chumpish, and generally to be avoided." The second is a mocking term of friends and or enemies. Its origins lie in New York, with a national commercial campaign by Burger King in the 1980s, where it stated that "don't be a herb, get the Whopper." In it, herb was a combination of a nerd and a moron. Now, but in all honesty, you are listening to the last segment on me discussing for an hour, my hour-long discussion on herbs and spices and just generally kind of seasonings at this point. What do you think? Do you think that I'm doing a good job? Is there anything you want to talk about in just cooking in generally? Cooking is actually an area of life that I'm actually kind of a bit weaker on. It's not because of I'm not interested. I've got a general rule that I'm pretty much interested in everything. But it just kind of doesn't come up, I've noticed. Or at least when I'm talking. And I've been really thinking this is something I should really learn more about, and this is why one of the reasons I want to talk about herbs so much. But unfortunately, with me being me, there's always politics at the end of this, and there's politics no less when it comes to herbs as well. I'm going to start by talking about a very, very old scenario, a very old kind of plant. Let's cast our minds back to the Roman times. And we go to the possibly as far as the 1st century BC, though the exact timings of when it first comes about are very vague. Around the city of Cyrene, which is in North Africa, the ruins of Cyrene are in modern-day Libya. We have a very, very interesting looking plant that is growing. The plant had, by all accounts, it had yellow. It was kind of medium-sized. It had apparently, according to one writer, who I'm quoting on Wikipedia, it had, quote, "thick roots covered in black bark, about 48 centimeters long, with one cubile, with a hollow stalk, similar to a fennel, and golden leaves, like a celery. This plant was very, very popular because it had a very, very important, not important, but I want to say, you see, I'm trying to think like what the exact words should be. I think the exact thing I should say is it had a very, very unique effect. Because you see, the plant had a contraceptive quality to it. According to Simon Whistler in his content, someone I really do quite like, the plant, basically, if you ate it as a woman, it would render you sterile, and if you were already pregnant, it would terminate the pregnancy and get rid of the fetus. I think you can see where this story might be going. Basically, any woman who wanted to, do some measure of family planning, who wanted to not be pregnant all the time, was, in the ancient world, during Roman times, looking into silphium and getting silphium. By all accounts, silphium was very, very nice. It was used in teas. It was used in foods. Long after its extinction, says Wikipedia, silphium continued to be mentioned in lists of aromatics, copied from one to another, until it makes its last appearance in the list of spices by a Carolingian cook. It was used apparently a lot in medicine as well. According to Wikipedia, many medicinal uses were ascribed to the plant. It was said that it could be used to treat a cough, sore throat, fever, indigestion, aches and pains, warts, and all kinds of maladies. Hippocrates, the father of medicine himself, said that when the gut protrudes and will not remain in its place, scrape the finest and most compact silphium into small places and apply as a cataplasm. It was, sounds a bit silly to just say that, this one plant could do that. But then again, lots of plants have strange and unusual qualities. Herbal medicine has been used for a very long time and is still continues to be used today. Medicinal teas are very common, just about everywhere. In ancient China and modern China, for many treatments, for many ailments, just get a good tea with a few little herbs in it, and boom, you're sorted. One slight problem, though. There were a lot of people who lived in the Roman Empire and in ancient Greece, and there were a lot of the women who wanted contraception and or abortions. And the plant was overused. According to Simon Whistler, the very, very last plant of silphium was actually harvested under the reign of Emperor Nero of the Roman Empire. And the very, very last plant of silphium was presented to the Roman Emperor as this curiosity, as this oddity. It's like, hey, look at this. Here's this plant. It's called silphium. Yeah, we all used to use it, for contraception, but now this is the last one. Reportedly, Nero didn't know what it was, so he ate it. The plant is now extinct, and has been extinct since Nero's time. The actual identity of silphium is lost to history. We have as far as we can tell, we have no samples of it, and we only have images and written records of what the silphium plant actually was. But don't think that silphium's the only plant that will just go extinct. In fact, a great deal of the herbs and the spices that we use are not cultivated. And that's kind of a problem. There's a good deal of herbs, especially like out in the wild, that are actually very, very much under threat. There's a movement out there now in Britain, in particular. I've forgotten their name. That's why I can't bring up an article on it, which is really annoying. I think they call themselves like guerrilla gardeners. And what they do, basically, was they went around, pavements, streets, and put little labels next to all the different plants there to say, like, oh, this plant is this and it has these properties. A lot of these plants are edible, but they're under threat. Habitat destruction, harmful agricultural policies that just mean that we farm one plant to intensity, to ignoring all others. And the fact that we use a lot of herbicides for our crops. Well, that works fine when you want to grow a big, strong plant that can take some herbicides. But again, herbs are inevitably always small, little plants, which of course can't take that much because they're small and little. And so they die. And then because they're dead, they can't reproduce, they can't grow. And then when they do grow, we farm them, we overuse them and eat them. And it's kind of scary. It's one of those things that's kind of really sad when it comes to food. And I should do a special on this at some point, is the amount of varieties of food that we're having has actually been on a bit the decline, and it has been for quite some time. The different varieties of potato, for example, there used to be over 3,000 different varieties of potato. There's definitely not 3,000 varieties of potato out there anymore. The vast majority of the ones there are grown locally in South America, never to grow anywhere else. That's an issue. It's an issue especially, and I discussed earlier, the fact that food insecurity is a bit of a challenge, where that only becomes harder if we rely on fewer and fewer different types of plants to feed ourselves at the end of the day. We really need to start looking into and thinking about how we do agriculture. It's clear on so many levels that modern mechanized agriculture, while amazing for certain things, the sheer amount of food it produces is a miracle. But we do need to think about the fact that it has a lot of harmful side effects, and that itself ultimately could decrease the amount of food we will have for the future, including the little herbs and spices that make the food that we like to eat just that much more worthy of being eaten. The show is almost done, but not quite yet. I have one last little thing to discuss after these other people discuss their important pressing issue. Don't worry, I will update what they have to say very, very soon.
Whoa, relax radio.
আপনি হয়তোবা জানেন না যে রেডিও অ্যাডভার্টাইজমেন্ট ইজ 4 times more powerful than any other media. রিল্যাক্স রেডিওতে যদি অ্যাডভার্টাইজ করতে চান তাহলে আমাদেরকে আজই যোগাযোগ করুন on 020-7474-9292. আমাদের সাথে অ্যাডভার্টাইজ করুন from £99 a month. Increase your business by advertising on Relax Radio.
It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. It's time for a show on Relax Radio. It talks about me and you. So listen to us, 24 hours, and let the happiness come to you on Relax Radio. Tune in to Relax Radio.
It has been too long. No one has taken the initiative to know who you are and what you do. Well, Relax proudly presents Relax Media to unite and expose all media-related personalities under one umbrella. If you are an artist or maybe you're looking for one, look no further. Log on to www.relaxmedia.com RELAKS media.com. In return, you get a free webpage and exposure to wider fan appreciation and contacts. Also, optional personal manager. Don't delay.
Relax Radio.
Alright, and hello again. Welcome back to the Wednesday Whitterer. We are almost done with this discussion, but there is one last thing I do actually really want to bring to your attention. It's a bit of a change in pace, which is why I'm kind of leaving it for last. This year has been pretty atrocious for a lot of people. I think that goes without saying. You know, the pandemic has rampaged through the world. It's killed over 1 million people worldwide. A lot of the people who have gotten sick with the coronavirus, they have lifelong effects. But one of the things that has been the most untalked about has been the fact that during lockdowns, during all these restrictions, there's a lot of damage that is done to your mental health. There is a lot of damage that is done to your sense of well-being, to your happiness. And this is already something that is taking place on top of a veritable mental health crisis among young men. But men generally, but young men in particular, have some shocking rates of depression and anxiety out in the world. I remember one study last year that found, this was 2019, remember, before the pandemic, that said that among men in the United States, the United States and in Britain, it was a similar number, about 80% of men had, in the past year, not the year, it was like the past 2 years, considered killing themselves. This is a threat that's followed through, and quite a fair number of them, of men, do. About one man in Britain takes that choice and ends their life every day or every hour. That's why I'm going to be signing up this year for Movember, the charity initiative to raise awareness on men's health and to do something about this crisis. According to Movember, there are 5 things that you really should know, and that are so important, not just for the men who are listening, but for the women who are listening. These are for the men in your lives that really make a difference. The first point is of what we should do is 1, spend time with people who make you feel good. Stay connected. Your mates are important, and spending time with them is good for you. Catch up regularly, check in, and make time. 2 is talk more. You don't need to be an expert, and you don't have to be the sole solution. Being there for someone, listening, and giving your time can be life-saving. And this is why, in part, the pandemic lockdowns have been such a disaster for mental health. Since we're not talking to each other, since we're all staying at home, all the demons that are in our heads, they just sit there, they stew, they brew, and then they manifest. And it really doesn't have to. Because, according to Movember, 70% of men in studies say that their friends can rely on them for support. Right? But only 48% of men say that they themselves rely on their friends. In other words, we all think we're here for our friends. We all think, oh yeah, if my friend ever knocks on my door, ever needs help, I'll be there to help them out. we don't think that applies to us too. If we need help, if we have an issue, it turns out that we actually do, for most people, there actually is a support structure out there. There are people who will help you, but you have to tell them. You have to be open about these problems. There is so many just different ways in which men's health is just routinely downplayed, ignored, not given the justice, light of day that it has to. And I honestly would go into it much more if I had more time. But suffice to say that I really do feel strongly that Movember, the initiative to raise awareness on this matter, is a very good cause. I've posted in the comments for the Facebook live stream. So if you're listening to this on Facebook, you will see the link to my Movember page. My plan will be to shave off everything on the 1st of November, and then throughout that month grow a mustache. I'm not quite sure what style of mustache I will aim for, but just for the month, grow a mustache, post regular updates, and post regular updates and facts on Movember and on the state, the really sad, tragic, sorry state of men's mental health in the year 2020. The suicide rate among men is atrocious. Among young men in particular, suicide is, I believe it was the leading cause of death among men under the age of 30 in Britain. And it doesn't have to be. We could easily fix this if we just put more attention and care and effort to solving the problem. So please, give Movember a look. Donate to my little initiative, and I hope that we will be able to, have more discussions on the Wednesday Whitterer and elsewhere on tackling this enormous health crisis that's just looming right underneath the surface. However, in the meantime, and in between time, this is the end of the Wednesday Whitterer. I hope that you all have a very, very good day. You are listening, of course, to Relax Radio, and we have all sorts of wonderful shows on. I know that Regina is going to be coming up next on the studio. Regina is new to the station, but shows a lot of promise, and I really look forward to seeing how her show develops and pans out as she grows up into the role, if you will. So definitely give that one a listen. Of course, there's all the old shows of the George's Breakfast Buffet and the Wednesday Whitterer for myself. There's Dominic, there's Hafsa, so many talented people on Relax Radio. Give us a listen, give us a shout, leave comments in the comments section, and in the meantime, and in between time, have a very, very good day. Goodbye.